This just in, teenagers are not the worst.
And sometimes we forget that they're just people. And so if someone moved in across the street and you thought, I want to become friends with that person, what would you do? Well, you'd find commonality. You'd invite them to do things with you. You'd find ways to laugh together. You'd maybe take them to lunch. And those are all things that I try to do with my teens, because I think once they hit that age where they understand your funny jokes, where they're starting to think for themselves, we have to start treating them differently than we do the 6 and 9-year-old. We have to start saying, okay, so I'm going to build a friendship with this person who is developing.
This is the How She Moms podcast with Whitney Archibald. I'm a mother of 5 on a mission to help moms connect with your kids, manage your homes, and create your own unique version of motherhood. I curate ideas from different moms so you can pick and choose what works for you and your family. Camille Ward is a cozy fireplace of a person. She makes you immediately comfortable. Talk to her for 5 minutes, and not only will you thoroughly enjoy yourself, you'll also end up with a standing invitation to family dinner. I first got to know Camille through her fabulous podcast, Family Looking Up, which she co-hosts with Andrea Nielsen and Beth Millward. So I was so excited to meet her in person at a conference. We became instant friends, and I've learned so much from her over the years. Camille is the mother of 6 children, 3 of whom have now left the nest, 1 in high school and 2 more in elementary school, so she was one of the first people I thought of when I wanted to learn more about parenting teenagers. I rarely run hour-long interviews, but believe me, I edited this down until I just didn't want to part with any more of Camille's wisdom. She just kept hitting all the issues that I'm starting to face as a relatively new teen mom, from how to connect with teens and how to set boundaries, to how to help them choose what activities to participate in and make decisions for themselves. Before we get into the interview, I have a small favor to ask you. If you've been listening for a while, you may know that my passion is more for creating the podcast than marketing it. But I just went to Apple Podcasts and realized that I just have 1 review. Thank you to This House is a Home. And I used to have more, but they're gone for some reason. So I was hoping that a few of you who have been listening for a while might take a few minutes. To leave a quick review of what you like about the podcast. A couple of reviews would go a long way to increasing my visibility and helping us get some more listeners and grow our community, so thank you. Now let's get to this interview with Camille. I started our interview with the question, what do you wish you had known about raising teens when your first son hit that stage?
I think too often we get it into our head that teenagers are really hard. And because it's the same as toddlers. Toddlers and teenagers are the ones that we hear about, and we hear these really scary stories. And I have been blessed to not have the really scary stories as part of my experience. So I do want to say that, because I know that they can be incredibly hard and go into some real adult hard things. However, I don't think that we should anticipate that. And I think that, I have worked with teens in church for years and years. I've taught them. I've done a lot of things with teens. I love teens. But even when my own teen, who was a boy, turned into a tween and his hormones started raging, and he was angry. He was all of the things that boys really struggle through middle school, I think, in a lot of ways. I feel like I was a little too heavy-handed in how I tried to deal with it. And the thing that I've learned is that the relationship with that child is the number 1 most important thing. It's more important than homework getting turned in. It's more important than their room being cleaned. It's more important than them walking in at 10 o'clock on the dot. And that's not to say that we let all those other things go. But I think primarily in our mind, as we deal with our teens, the number 1 thing we need to run through our mind every time, again and again and again, when we feel frustrated, is my relationship with this child is what will help this child more than any other thing that I'm teaching. And I think that it helps them to want to be obedient. It helps them to want to have a good relationship. And so going into it, I I feel like my son was right around 15 years old. We are a lot alike. He's very stubborn. He doesn't like to get a lot of critique or things like that. He's very messy. And we just were butting heads. And I had an experience where he was in a play and I was sitting there watching him, and in the play, it was in Seven Brides for Seven Brothers. And, you know, he's the main guy in it. And so here he is married and he's going to have a baby here. And I had this really powerful moment sitting there in the audience where the thought came very clearly to me: your relationship with him is more important than any of these other little things. And that is what will help him more than anything else. And in my mind, I understood, okay, that's the room. We're talking about the room. We're talking about these other things that I thought, it's my job to teach him these things. If I'm not teaching him these things, I'm failing. But in that moment, I feel like I really learned that sometimes those things need to take a back seat to working on your relationship.
That is such a good reminder, because I'm having this battle about food with one son in particular who wants me to just wait on him hand and foot and make every sandwich and, you know, tell him what to eat. And, you know, and then he says, no, that's gross. But, you know, like that kind of thing. Yes. And I'm seeing like, he's going to starve when he's on his own. I like go to this weird place. We're like, no, you know what? He's going to figure it out. And even if it's not a power play, even if he just is clueless, he can look things up on YouTube. Like, I think we get all these checklists of things that they need to do. And I just created my own checklist of things they need to do to be responsible. I'm like all about the checklist. But if we focus too much on those checklists, and don't give them the credit that like they can learn those from some other source besides you, if it's damaging the relationship.
Right. And I feel like as I've seen my kids leave home, he ended up being in Italy on a mission right as coronavirus exploded. And so he would call home every week, and it was hard for him. A lot of anxiety, depression. He was locked in his apartment for 122 days, could only leave once a week for 30 minutes. I mean, it was intense. They had like armed guards in the streets in Italy. It was so intense. And it was in those moments that I felt like I am so grateful that I just dropped the room issue and built a relationship with him, because now he calls me each week and he really wants to talk and he really listens. And I feel like it created the environment that he could go and thrive even in these hard experiences. Then my daughter went to BYU Hawaii as Hawaii locked down. And so she was supposed to be on a meal plan. I didn't worry about all the cooking things. For the first year, they're required to do the cafeteria. And then she ends up in some apartment with girls older than her. And I hadn't hit those things. And I thought, she is going to die. She's going to die. And thank goodness for FaceTime. She would call me at Walmart and say, where do I find green chilies? And I would tell her where to go. And she would call me and say, how do I cook chicken so it tastes good? And I would walk her through it. And I found that really the things that we get so worked up and stressed out about as parents, I think they know more than we think they do. They pick it up. And if we're damaging that relationship in order to accomplish the checklist, I think we've gone too far the other way.
Well, and we get stuck in the past because we know where they came from. We've seen like they were pretty dumb when they were babies.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. I mean, you know what I mean?
They would eat poo. I mean, they're pretty dumb. Yes, they didn't know anything.
So when we look at our past and then we project their middle school selves into the future, yeah, that's a scary prospect when we forget how much they're going to learn and grow. And I mean, as far as developmentally, I would compare the teen times to those toddler times.
Yes.
For that too, and how fast they change and grow.
Yes, so, it is insane.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about this connection then. What are some of the things you specifically have done with your teens, especially different teens with different personalities, to connect with them during this time when they're kind of pushing away?
Yeah. For me, I try very hard to identify things that they enjoy doing, and I try to find a way to join them in that. And so, like, I have a son who loves to make little movies on his iPhone. And so we make family movies together, and that's really fun. I have another son who he's the 15-year-old, and if I let him, he would sit in a recliner from dawn till dusk, either reading or watching something on TV. That is where he wants to live. And because of that, I have looked at what shows he's watching and I go join him so that we can be laughing together, so that we can share inside jokes of things that we've watched. My 17-year-old loves scary movies. He wanted to watch this scary movie that I thought it would be really dumb. I enjoy a good scary movie, not thrasher scary, just a jump scare, okay? And I thought that movie sounds incredibly dumb, but he really wanted to watch it. So he and I went down and we watched it, and we laughed the whole way through it. And to this day, he and I quote it, and we just think it's the funniest thing. If I had my oldest son really wanted to do football, and so we did football through high school. We went to his games, we supported him. Just trying to find things. If they want to be in basketball, shooting hoops with them. Trying to find a way to go to them instead of expecting them to come to you. Trying to incorporate driving with them into your life, because that is a time when they're locked into a small space with you, and communication just naturally occurs if both of you don't have your earbuds in.
Right.
But the thing that is, I think, really important to understand about teenagers, is that I don't think that they're unwilling to let you in to do things, as long as you're not saying, well, you want to go to that party, I'll go with you. Obviously that is not a great approach, but finding ways to just build a friendship. And sometimes we forget that they're just people. And so if someone moved in across the street and you thought, I want to become friends with that person, what would you do? Well, you'd find commonality. You'd invite them to do things with you. You'd find ways to laugh together. You'd maybe take them to lunch. And those are all things that I try to do with my teens, because I think once they hit that age where they understand your funny jokes, where they're starting to think for themselves, we have to start treating them differently than we do the 6 and 9-year-old. We have to start saying, okay, so I'm going to build a friendship with this person who is developing. And I'm going to do that by inviting them to do things with me, and I'm going to find ways to do what they want to do. And I think that when we do that, they see that we're reaching out, and I found that to be really helpful.
That's beautiful. Okay, so how have you set boundaries with your teens? And I'm curious if you have like family rules, and then here are some of the boundaries we have with individual age groups, since you have such a wide span.
So I feel like my teens are very willing to not push out the boundaries that are just naturally there. As our oldest kids got old, I mean, it just kind of became common knowledge that if it's a school night, you ought to be home somewhat close to 10. If it's a weekend, it ought to be somewhat close to midnight. If it's not, you ought to communicate. I feel like there's the general things. As far as, I think that the times that we have to maybe push against them a little bit is when it comes to work. And I believe that working as a family is key to helping develop teens' ability to do hard things. And in olden days, or those who are blessed now, they have a farm. That's like the classic thing where you teach your kids to work on a farm. We moved to this really rural area and we didn't have a farm. And it was in my mind that we needed to have a farm of some kind that they could work on. So we bought a fixer-upper, and it had no yard. And so for the last 17 years, on Saturdays and in the evenings, we have worked on our house and we've worked in the yard. And those are the times when the teens are like most hesitant and resistant to having to do hard things.
Uh-huh.
And those are the times when we say to them, sorry, but we do hard things as a family. This is what we do, and we do it together. And I've always felt like if I'm asking them to go do something hard, I ought to be willing to do it too. And so if I say you've got to go weed out this whole area, I usually go with them because I think it's important for them to see that we're doing it together. So I got my little brain trust because I love how you do this, Whitney, how you always have so many different people that you've talked to. I thought through who are 3 moms who parent very differently from each other.
Oh.
And from me in many ways, who I have admired and respected the way that they do things. And so I have a lot of sister-in-laws, and I chose 3 who are a bit ahead of me. They have grown kids now. Most of them are grown. And I called each of them and I talked to them about these questions. And one of them is, so I'm going to refer to them a little bit as we go through.
Oh,
so
this is an extra bonus. I love it.
So Wendy is my sister-in-law that actually lives in this little town with me. And so I think my thinking and theory comes through a lot of my discussion with her over the last 17 years as we've raised kids together. One of the things she talked about with boundaries is just understanding that bad behavior shouldn't be ignored. And so she talked about how the biggest things that they set boundaries on is how their kids treat each other. And understanding that something that is not okay is treating your sibling badly. And that's something that shouldn't be ignored. That's something that there needs to be family discussion. It needs to be clear that really what we're doing in motherhood is we are trying our hardest to create good human beings. And sometimes we forget that in all of the hubbub of sports and dance and everything else. We forget that really the goal isn't to create an athlete, isn't to create a violinist. The goal is to create a really good human being who will better the world and do well in life. And so the biggest thing that she and her husband set boundaries on was centered around their behavior in the family. If they're doing things that's dragging the family down, that needs attention. If they're doing things that is dragging their siblings down, that needs attention. And I've done that in my family. The thing that I've said again and again to my kids is, you have to go to school and you have to deal with people treating you badly all day, and so does your sibling. And when you come home, this is a safe place where you don't have to be treated badly. And so it's not okay for you to treat that person badly and ruin their safe space. So if you need to go have alone time, go do it, but you're not allowed to treat them badly. And I feel like those are the biggest rules in her house. That's the biggest rules in our house. And I feel like if they really understand the rule of lift the family, they don't push the other rules very much.
Yeah. Oh, I love that approach of like, yeah, this is our safe place. It should just be a given that we all treat each other well here. I love that.
So I just one example really quickly.
Yeah. Oh,
I have a son who, when he was in 3rd grade, we could tell that he was not understanding some social norms very well. So we had him do some testing and found out that he has what's called a social pragmatic communication disorder. And in a nutshell, what that means is all of the social skills that people naturally have, that just come with maturity, he doesn't understand naturally, but he can be taught those things. And so that's been a really interesting dynamic in our family. As a young kid, and so he's number 4 in the family. And so the older kids would get very, very annoyed because he wasn't understanding some things, and they would become harsh with him. And so I can't even tell you the number of times we sat down as a family, sometimes with him, sometimes without, saying, you have to find a way to be more patient, because it's not okay. He's dealing with this at school too. So it's not okay for you to ruin what peace he has. And so he has gotten better and better and better at understanding these things. And I don't bring it up anymore. I do teach him things, but I don't call it that and label it that. But that has been a dynamic that we've had to deal with, and just helping the kids to understand it's not okay for him to be the target of your frustration or annoyance, or you just think you're really funny.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great example. So what do you do? I mean, I'm sure they don't always obey that rule. Like what do you do to when they do treat each other badly?
I usually take kids aside one-on-one, and I listen to them and I talk to them, and quite honestly, I plead with them. As a mom, I try and explain to them from my perspective how sad that is and how damaging it is and how much it makes that person feel bad. I also let them vent, because I understand how sometimes we just get really annoyed, and that's human, and they're not perfect, and I understand that. And so if they need to vent, I'm happy to listen. But I think that oftentimes a pleading parent can go a long way in helping kids to have more empathy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that's a pretty empathetic approach too, especially if you're willing to listen, and then you're kind of being that you're deflecting that. So the person who is the annoyer doesn't have to hear the venting.
Yes.
You can be that place, and then it's out of their system and they can move on.
Yeah.
I like
Right.
that. Okay. So what about some of the details? Like, what have you done? How have you taught your teens about money, for example?
Well, I feel like this is, boy, every parent has to deal with, do we do the allowance? Do we not do the allowance? How do we handle it? I don't know that we've handled it the best way. I feel like I'm still trying new things. Overall, my husband and I have felt like a teenager's biggest responsibility and biggest job is to be a student. And that's a really important job. Once they get to 16, we have them work during the summers, because that's healthy and they need to earn some money. We
And
have
they
them
need some
pay.
occupation in the
They
summers. Oh
do.
boy.
Oh, yes, yes. Or else you're going to have a lot of those pleading talks because they're annoyed because they're stuck at home. We felt like, things like clothes, basic needs, we felt like we provide that. If they want to go get lunch, or they want to get a drink, or they want to go on a date, that's their responsibility. They can deal with that. And, for instance, my senior, he, at the beginning of this year, was really feeling like he ought to be working. He had, all of his friends had part-time jobs going through school. All of my kids have gone through this. We've done this three times now. He's our third. And he felt like, I really ought to be working. And we sat down with him and we said, okay, well, let's look at minimum wage, and then let's take taxes out. Let's say this is how many hours you could work. So essentially you'd be getting $400. Okay. I'm just coming up with a number, but it was
Right.
something like that. It's not that much money. We said, okay, instead, let's say you work really hard and you get A's. Let's say that you spend that same amount of hours every week filling out scholarship applications. So if you were to get this many scholarships, I mean, the first scholarship would blow the $400 out of the water. And so we've just really felt like, your job is to be a student. Our job is to be a parent. We're happy to pay for that. As far as ways to earn money, we always tell our kids, if you want to earn money, we have a lot of jobs. We're happy to pay you. My sister-in-law, Wendy, talked about paying them to clean out the car, paying them to weed, paying them to pick up all the garbage that blows into the yard. For Saturdays, I sometimes will set up a system where I list every single job broken down. So like bathroom, I'll break it down. Toilet, bathroom sink, sweep. And I'll do each of those with a line next to it. I tell them, you go sign up for it. You get me to check it off when you're done. I'll pay you X amount of money for every single job you do. And that really gets a 6-year-old working hard and fast. That really gets all of them working because they feel like now they get to choose their job as well as get paid for it. I did want to pass on though, my sister-in-law, Beverly, her kids, her oldest, my gosh, how old would he be? Mid-20s. Then the next one is mid-20s and the next one is probably 21. One thing that she did with her kids is they decided when their oldest son was a tween, trying to deal with the middle school homework, different teachers. He's very smart, but he was having a hard time getting things in on time, which I very much understand. I've been through this with my kids. They decided that one thing they were going to do is start doing Sunday interviews every week with each of their kids. And it didn't need to be an hour long or even a half an hour long, but the things that they were going to talk about in those interviews is they were going to talk about their homework each week. Are they getting it in on time? They made a rule that they had to turn their homework into their teacher, even if it was too late to get a grade for it. And they felt like that really helped the kids to understand, just do the homework because you can do it now and get something or later and not. But they would talk about what goals do you have? Let's find volunteer opportunities. Let's find, if in church you're supposed to be reaching goals, let's talk about those. When they had a son in Scouts, he was able to get his Eagle Scout because every week they're touching base. But the interesting thing that they did is they told their kids that they would pay them to do the interview. And so they had a set amount of money and they felt like, okay, we want you to focus on your school. Okay, so we don't want you to go get a job during school time, but we will pay you to do these interviews where we go through homework, we go through all of these things that help them to learn how to do all of these adult skills, and then they'd get paid money. And they had different choices of what to do with that money. And one of the things that they did is they'd put that in the education fund that the kids are now all in college and they're all using. But I thought that was fascinating. I'm going to do actually an entire episode on this thing that she did and air it when school is starting because I found it fascinating.
Yeah.
And it incorporated a lot of these problems. It incorporated boundaries. And they didn't do any of the things for their kids. They just helped to guide them each Sunday, touching base. If you'll do this interview, we'll pay you money. So no kid is going to say, I'm not going to do the interview. And so it was a great way to give them that allowance. And the allowance was focused on accomplishing these things that they needed to do.
Oh, that's genius. I love it. And, like, there are always the naysayers that say, well, isn't that kind of bribery or, don't use money. But that's pretty great preparation for the world. That is what we have decided is our bartering. That's our currency. That is, I don't see anything wrong with using it as it's just an exchange,
Yeah,
so
exactly. And, it's like on Saturday when I put that list up, I usually have to fight my kids all day. Stop reading the book. Get up. Your room is not clean. What is going on here? Why do you think this is a clean bathroom? But when I put that list up and they knew, and it was, Whitney, it was 50 cents a line. That is all I was offering. That means 50 cents for a toilet, 50 cents for vacuuming this room. But when you get, 10 of them, you've earned $5. And instead you could have just gotten yelled at all day.
Well, and
So
and
it's
it's
a better deal.
specific and it's finite. Instead of saying like, we're going to clean the whole house today, and you're not
Right.
doing anything fun until it's done.
Right.
It's a way to make it manageable, and it puts the responsibility on them. I love that. That's great.
Yeah.
Okay, so um let's shift gears for a minute and talk about your identity and role as a mom at this age and how it changes from those elementary years. What shifts in your role and your relationship and responsibilities to these teenagers?
So I think that the biggest thing that I've come to understand is that when they are little, it is literally illegal for us to not connect with them over things like diaper changes and feeding them and all of these things. It's built into what they are. They need us. And so we have to interact with them. We have to interact with our toddlers. We have to talk with them. We have to give them food. We dress them. We have to take care of them. And because of that, it's just built in that we're connecting and we're in a relationship together. Once they become teenagers, we could literally not even talk or touch base with them for a week or more, depending on what age of a teenager they are. And so nothing is built in. And so we as parents have to make that jump to saying, now my job is to create ways to connect with this child because it isn't built in anymore. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I've had to learn is that relationship again, over all else, we, even when we're tired, even when we don't want to have to go talk to them because we'd rather go to bed, making that jump to creating those moments when we can touch base. Family dinner, if we make that a real thing instead of just everybody find something, that's one of those built-in things that we can create where we're actually communicating with each other and developing that relationship.
Yeah, so it's just such a different mindset and skill
It is.
set.
It is. And I feel like, younger kids are much harder on our mental state because it is just a constant need. Whereas I feel like teenagers, we have a lot more freedom. And so we're able to read more books or do the things that bring us more mentally healthy things, but we're exhausted. And so I feel like with teenagers, it takes more of a physical effort. If they're into basketball and we have to go shoot hoops, that is a physical effort. Even if they're downstairs watching a show and we decide we're going to go watch it, we don't really want to watch that show very much. It is an effort to go down there and do it. And I think just understanding that shift, that there's different parts of us that are worked with different ages, it helps us to not miss opportunities, and it helps us to not be bitter about having to go do some of those things. For instance, a car ride. And I know you've talked about how good car rides can be to connect with kids. But again, I'd so much rather in many instances listen to an Agatha Christie book in my ears than listen to the day and time of middle school ups and downs. It's hard and we don't necessarily want to do it, but if we ignore that and we don't do those things, then we don't have a good relationship.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's especially hard when you're going back and forth between those two modes, right?
Right.
Like, how do
It is
you
very
manage
hard.
that?
That was a really hard transition because our youngest would have been in elementary school when I started again with babies, and our oldest was in high school playing football. And so it was a very hard transition trying to take these little kids to all of these big kid things and wrestle them during track meets or plays or whatever it was. We learned that electronics aren't all bad, that sometimes a Kindle during a play with some headphones on is a lifesaver, so you can be there to support those other kids. We learned that when you have teenagers and you have babies, it is very, very easy to just make the teenagers do a lot of the things for the babies. And I really didn't want to create older kids who resented little kids. I think that's a really easy, slippery slope of things to happen. And so I tried to go out of my way to make sure that I was talking with them, make sure they weren't overwhelmed. And I always pay them if they babysit their siblings. That is part of the deal. If you'll babysit, I'll give you this to make it worth it to them. And it's a hard thing to try and find that balance. Sometimes things like movie nights, you've got this kid that wants to watch Peppa Pig, and you've got this kid that wants to watch a thriller, and they just don't mesh. And so sometimes my husband and I have just split up, if we go to the movies, I take the boys or the bigger kids to this and he goes to the little kids show. Or if we want to watch something with our older kids, we'll turn on something for the little kids in a different room where they get to watch it. We just try and balance that. But I think it's so good for older kids, and I think it's so good for little kids. I didn't have that big of a span on purpose. I didn't want that to happen. But now that I have had it happen, I have just been amazed at how those big kids step into the shoes of I'm the big kid and I'm going to take care of you and help you. I think it helps to make them more gentle and more sensitive and more responsible. And I think it helps those little kids to just be, they've just got a lot of people around them to love them and help them. It's a safe environment for them.
Yeah. So can we talk for a little bit about what it was like as you were launching, especially your first? Like, what feelings did you have? What did you do to prepare them? And how did that all go down? I don't even know the questions to ask because I haven't been there. It seems so overwhelming.
My oldest is just a really full of energy, dynamic, hilarious guy. And he was really close to his sister, just younger than him. They're just 1 year apart in school. And I just had dread. I just kept thinking, how on earth is our family going to be okay? It just feels like something is going to get ripped out of us. And I hadn't done that before. I was really, really worried about it and just full of dread. And it was an interesting process to watch it happen. I made sure that we were spending a lot of time together. I made sure that we were doing some really important family trips before he left, that we were really working into the fabric of our family, some special experiences before he left. I felt like that was really important. And we decided we would take our kids kind of come in twos, 2, then a couple years, 2, then a couple years, or a lot of years, 2. So we decided we'd take a trip with each 2 when the oldest of the 2 was a senior, and would go on a trip somewhere in the world with just those, because we couldn't afford to do 6 kids in Europe, but we can afford to do 2 kids in Europe. And so we thought, well, we'll do that and that'll be special. And that was really neat because it cemented some of those really wonderful experiences that I knew that we would cherish in the years to come. And so it was interesting to watch him leave. My daughter, legitimately did go into a depression. It was really upsetting. It was about 6 months before she realized that her brother, just younger than her, was also really fun and funny, and that she could develop that relationship instead of mourning the one that had left. And so it is a fascinating thing to watch your family. When one leaves, you go through this really interesting adjustment period where the next kid in line learns to step into those shoes, and they become the main driver. They become the main babysitter. They become the one in charge. They become the cook when I'm not home because I'm gone podcasting. They become this next oldest kid. And the benefit of having a bunch of kids is that a lot of those lessons that they need to learn to leave home, they just learn by being the oldest. And so it was a really interesting experience. It's bittersweet because you do miss that child who's off experiencing the next phase of their life. But it's also really fun to watch these other kids step into new roles, grow and develop. And the thing that I learned is that you get other really wonderful blessings when they leave home. I don't dread it as much anymore. My oldest son, he came home, he was here for a heartbeat, got married to someone that he had known before that had been writing. And she is amazing. And now she's part of us. And so she's in our fabric. And so when they leave, I try and remember they come back, even if it's not physically in our home, back living for long periods of time. We get to connect with them, laugh with them, tell all those inside jokes with them, quote movie lines with them, and have this really wonderful kind of growing experience. And we're about to do it again. I've got my senior, and I keep thinking, how am I going to live without him? He is so great. And then I think, well, my 15-year-old will step up and he'll become that oldest kid. And I love the relationship that I get to develop with the oldest child. I feel like that's a time when I get to focus on that child and really nourish that relationship as I help them get to the next step in life. And I usually get 2 years. That's what it's been like in the past, is I get about 2 years to kind of focus on them. And then when they leave, I'm ready to focus on the next one and help that one come through.
Well, and that's the foundation you've laid, making it all about the relationship ahead of time, so that it's not like, oh, we've got to check all these boxes, get them up and out of here. Like, sure, there's like some of that you need to be able to function as a human being.
Absolutely. Yes.
But
at very least, you have to be able to make a quesadilla. I mean, basic things: brush your teeth, flush the toilet, make a quesadilla, be nice to people.
yes. But it's that relationship that's going to keep them coming back and keep them part of that family. And
yes, we got to just go up. We're about 6 hours away from him and his wife. And we got to just go up with our kids, and we took them to dinner and laughed and just had such a wonderful time. I got to see where they live because I hadn't seen it yet. And that did my mom heart good, because now I can imagine where they're at. And it's just a special thing. We drove away and I just thought, man, that is neat. Now I get to care about her too. Alyssa's just such a great addition to our family. And I kept telling myself when I was stressing out about him leaving, would I rather him not be able to leave? Would I rather him not be able to launch and have the guts to do it? No, I don't want that. I don't want a kid who's 30 years old playing video games in my basement. So we're going to go through this transition. We're going to make this work.
Well, and I love that approach, that it's all additive. You can look at it as losing children,
right?
But it's not. It's additive. They're gonna make their own family and add all those people to your circle and your relationships. And if we grieve and mourn instead of embracing, I mean, it happens with every stage, right? You mourn that little infant when they start to be able to sit up, and you mourn that, but it didn't take long to realize that every new stage was so exciting and great that's a big waste of time to sit there mourning.
It is. And the adult stage is pretty awesome. It's amazing to watch them learn new things and experience things and tell you about their experiences. And it's an exciting thing to be able to observe as a parent, because I remember years and years ago, probably when my oldest was in a tween stage, I listened to a podcast, and Julie B. Beck, who at the time was the General Relief Society president for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and she was being interviewed with her daughter. And they asked her, what do you think is one of the biggest important things about parenting that we forget? And so I really listened, because I loved her. I loved the things that she would talk about. And she said, I think we forget that we're raising our kids in a way that we will want to be friends with them when they're adults. And that hit me hard. I thought, that is truth. If we are always on them, and we're forgetting that we really want to make great human beings. And some of those human beings are going to be sloppy. And some of those human beings are going to be really good at saving money. And some of those human beings are probably going to make decisions that we may not make. However, if we're trying our hardest to create a relationship with them so that when they're adults, we want to be their friends and they want to be our friend, then it is really all additive from there.
Yeah.
We just have to understand they're not going to be perfect, just like we're not perfect. And if we are able to support the strengths and overlook the weaknesses and help them to grow and develop in their own way, then I think we do create these people that we want to be friends with.
Oh, that's beautiful. I don't know why we have such high hopes and high expectations. I mean, because we love them, because we see their potential. Like there are good reasons, but sometimes we go so far and expecting them to be inhuman, like superhuman. And especially even asking them to do things we don't ourselves do. Like my room isn't clean right now.
Yeah. Right. Neither is mine.
So
I remember when my son was in 9th grade, my oldest, he's a very smart boy, but not organized. And I remember when he was in 9th grade, I had heard other family members say, 9th grade is when colleges start looking at your grades. 9th grade is when it counts. 9th grade is a big deal. From then on, you've got to have A's if you want to get into the colleges. His goal at the time was to go to Brigham Young University. He wasn't getting homework done. He was having a hard time getting over that hump. And I remember I sat down and I said to him, you don't understand. If you act like this, you're not going to be able to go to BYU. That's not going to be something you can do. And I wish I could go back in time and never say that, because the truth is that he never got really good at getting homework in on time. Right now, he does get homework in on time because he pays for it because he's in college and he has a wife. And so it means more. But the thing that happened is it made him feel inadequate. It made him feel embarrassed. And he never even applied to BYU when college time came. In his head, I think he'd just thought, well, I'll never get in. I'm not going to apply, because I had said that negative thing to him. And I've never said that again to my other kids. And I really don't care what college they go to. He's at the University of Utah, which is an amazing college. And guess what? He got a huge scholarship. And so the kid who couldn't get his homework in on time turned out fine. He had several scholarships. And I feel like as we're heading into these years, we just get too tight about things like that. And we think, oh my gosh, the whole world depends on you getting your homework in on time. And as I've seen him grow into adulthood, I thought, oh, he's fine. Why did I do that? Why did I give him that message?
And what if that were true? That would be a terrible way to live. If your whole life depended on 4 years when your frontal lobe is not developed, if that was your last chance, we would have a lot of unsuccessful people walking around, like
absolutely.
It's just not the truth. And yet I mean, I've done it too. I've fallen into that trap too.
Yeah. We get wrapped around the drivetrain on certain topics that we think that we're doing the right thing. I thought I was encouraging him. I thought I was giving him a goal. I thought I was dangling a carrot that would mean something to him. I didn't do any of those things. So it was a learning experience. I don't do that anymore.
Yeah. That's great. That's cool. You just went full circle back to that first question I asked you. Like, what would you tell that beginning teenage mom? And it came right back to the relationship, what you were talking about. I love that.
I feel like, your 20s and 30s, you're running and trying to catch up and trying to be all the things you're supposed to be and feeling so insecure in so many ways. And I hit 40 and I looked around and thought, no, my kids are fine. I was so wrapped around the drivetrain that parenting meant this and it meant this and success meant this. And I looked around and thought, no, I've got some awesome human beings that I have the opportunity to have some influence in their life. And I need to let go of all of these extemporaneous things that we collect as being real that actually aren't. We need to let go of it. We need to just love them, do our best, get up, love them again the next day, do our best, get up, love them again the next day. And it's, we go through hard challenges. We deal with mental health. We deal with all of these different things that they're difficult. But if we're doing our best, usually things work out okay.
Yeah.
And our best, by the way, and this is something I like to say, our best usually means pretty mediocre. I feel like too often we hear, just get up and do your best every day. And then we go to bed and think, well, I didn't do my best. My best would have been these things. I tried, but I didn't get to my best. I think most often our best looks pretty normal. And that is fantastic.
Yeah.
We're doing great. And this goes into mental health, that they really are dealing with so much pressure. And I think helping them to understand that they don't have to be the football star or the drill team star. They don't have to be all of these things that are, like I said, extemporaneous and not real as being a valid, this makes you amazing.
Yeah.
But they each have unique talents and gifts that they need to lean into and understand that just as they are, they're pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Even if they don't have straight A's, even if they don't play the piano, even if they don't do all of these things that we've set up as being success, just being a great human being is amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And I feel like that's something that they need to hear about. I read about a study that was done quite recently where it cited that the levels of anxiety and depression in teenagers right now is far higher than the levels of anxiety and depression in teenagers during World War II, Vietnam, Korea, the Great Depression. Those were times when these teens were looking at death. And now they have more anxiety and depression. And so I thought that is just unbelievable. What is causing that kind of thing? And so I was reading a book by William Stixrud and Ned Johnson. I'm trying to remember what that book is called. I can't think of it right now. They've written 2 books. It's the second book that they'd written, and it's all about teenagers and mental health. Anyway, the thing that they found is that the reason why in many instances, so this is the overall problem, is that teens have lost the option of choosing what they're doing from day to day. And in America, this is the very worst. We are one of the worst countries at doing this in our culture, is that we have this idea as parents in our head that if our kids are not busy doing productive things, then we are failing as parents. So we sign them up for all the sports, and we sign them up for all the instruments and all the dance and all the things, because we believe that if they're just home, then they're not growing, it's bad, and it reflects badly on us. And because of that, they have just got this overwhelming loss of the simple thing of agency. And so they're finding that William Stixrud has a PhD and in mental health, and Ned Johnson, actually his major is that he has done ACT prep with kids. They're both on the East Coast where it's especially strenuous, and he does ACT prep. And both of them have worked together on studying this, and they found that just simply giving kids the option and letting them have the option decreases depression and anxiety immeasurably. It's insane that just that thing is the issue, that they have lost this ability to choose day to day what they're going to do. And they said, Kids don't have the option of not turning in their homework. They don't have the option of not going to their piano lessons. They don't have the option of all of these things. And if we instead are willing to say, what would you like to do? And actually not sign them up for everything if they don't want to, or let them sign up for something if they want to, and let them experience the life that that decision gives them, that actually lowers all of these mental health issues that they're dealing with. I thought that was absolutely fascinating. And yet we are so just immersed in this culture of a successful parent means a kid that's busy.
And a successful teenagerhood means
Yes.
checking this box, this box, this box, this box. And you have, by the way, you have this looming application
Yes.
that's ahead of you where
Yeah.
you have to account for all this and put yourself out there. Like that is intense.
And that's how I felt. I thought that is an amazing thing. I struggled when I was a mom of oldest being tweens, feeling that pressure of my kids need to be involved in all these things. And we live in this small town where like sports and hunting are the gods of, this is what all the kids need to be doing. I don't have athletic kids. And so I felt a lot of pressure to be putting them in those things, but they weren't enjoying them. And interesting, just as I kind of decided, well, I guess I'll do things differently. And so my kids haven't been involved in all those things. And I think in some ways there's pros and cons, but finding their other interests, trying to support them in those. I was talking, one of my other sister-in-law that was in my brain trust here is Josie, and one of the things that she talked about with just incorporating mental health and talents and letting kids make those decisions. She's got 4 boys, and she talked about how just letting them try what they wanted to try. She really had a dream that one of her kids would be this amazing violin player. And none of them wanted that dream. They all had different dreams. And she and her husband were just really good to say, okay, you want to try that new thing? That's fine. You can try it. No problem. Within reason. You can't try 12. But I feel like, the other thing that she mentioned that I think is really helpful to teens is that actually she and her husband are fantastic at trying new things themselves. They were just great examples of being fearlessly okay with trying new things and seeing if it was a good fit and allowing their kids to have a say and to go in and out of things. I think also allowing our kids to say they don't like something and stopping. We have it in our head that if we don't make them finish everything they start, that they're going to turn out to be quitters. But actually knowing when to quit something because it's not helping you is actually a gift. It's actually a really good thing to learn to do, to say in your life, I'm overwhelmed. I'm feeling a lot of anxiety and dread. Let's look at all the things in my life that could be causing it. Oh, this class I'm taking is killing me. You know what? I'm going to be done with that. That's actually really important in the world we live in, where we're told that we have to do and be everything to everyone, and allowing them the choice to say, I actually really hate this. I remember my middle son, he had a friend that was really into wrestling, and he decided he was going to try wrestling in like 6th grade. So we paid all the money and we did all the things, and he'd never wrestled a day in his life other than his older brother who would tie him up, And so I said, great, you want to do it? That's wonderful. Well, he got in there, and all these boys had been wrestling since they were 6. And he got put with this kid that wasn't very nice as his partner. And that kid just used him as a punching bag for the next month. And my son would come home in tears. He hated it. It was just the worst thing ever. And I remember thinking at the time, So do I listen to the voices that say, don't let him quit because he won't learn the lesson? Or do I use common sense and say, this is a horrible fit for him? This is not what this boy wants to be doing. I wouldn't let anyone in our house treat him like that. Why are we doing this? I would rather be out $35 or whatever it was and a uniform and let this boy come home and be safe. And that boy decided like 2 years later that he loved to write. And so he started writing stories. And now he's published one book. He's almost ready to publish his second book. He's just developed this wonderful gift of writing that is just within him, and they're good. Like, he's doing a great job. So we found ways to support that. But I look back at that wrestling thing and I say, I don't think he learned a bad lesson. I think he's followed through on writing. He's done a wonderful job at finishing out these stories that he writes and editing them and going through the hard process. And he was miserable. So let the poor kid out of wrestling,
Yeah. Well, it's a really a lesson in prioritizing. And instead we classify it as stick-to-itiveness, however you say that, or quitting. And that's not how life works. Life is not black and white like that. It's about priorities and values.
Right.
And if you're not allowing them the critical thinking that goes into that, and you're just doing that thinking for them and making those decisions for them, that's the problem.
And I think some of that agency of allowing them to have the experience of not doing it anymore and seeing in their life, do they feel bad about that? They have to live to learn. That same kid decided to play soccer, and he loved it. Like, it was great. And so I feel like just allowing them to have the say in what they want to do really goes a long way for them feeling happy inside. Yeah. And learning those lessons.
Oh man, that's coming up for us with our kid that's just entering high school next year, because he hasn't really found a sport that he likes. And so we're like, well, you have to pick one. But maybe we don't have to say that. Maybe he doesn't have to pick one. Like, sure, he has to keep his body moving and has to keep active, but like making him do cross country because there aren't auditions isn't necessarily the right,
Well, I get that. Like, my first three, I made them do cross country in middle school. That's what they had to do. I got to my fourth kid, who is a different kid than those three and is about as uncoordinated as you could get. And I was like, that would be torture. Why would I do that?
Yeah.
So I talked to him and said, you got to be moving. You don't like sports. What do you like to do? He said, I like to take walks. I'll take the dog on walks. I said, great, take walks. So he likes to take walks, and that is what he does to move. And I feel like that would have really freaked me out and stressed me out with those older kids. But for him, I feel like, no, that's fine. I'm fine with allowing him to make that decision. And I think it would have been pretty bad to make him do other things that weren't his thing. I can honestly say that having teenagers has been the funnest part of parenting for me. Everyone has kind of the thing they lean into. I had to learn to love the little kid stage. That one was my hardest stage to learn to love. But the teenager stage for me, they finally get my jokes. They're just fun. They're hilarious. I love to spend time with them. It really is such a joy to have teenagers in so many ways. And I understand that there's hard things that can happen with teenagers, but there's hard things that can happen with adults and kids and every age. I think that those teenage years for me now are something I look forward to. And when they leave, I feel kind of sad that we're leaving that stage, but I look forward to all of the blessings that the adulthood stage brings.
Thank you so much for listening to the How She Moms podcast and for being part of this community. There are so many other ways for you to connect and hopefully also contribute. I share tips and ideas regularly on Instagram and Facebook at How She Moms. You can find past episodes and other resources at howshemoms.com. And you can always just email me directly at whitney@howshemoms.com. Special thanks to my own wonderful mom, Susan Singley, for recording my theme music. She played this song all the time when I was growing up, and to me, it's the soundtrack of motherhood.